Welcome to Boombostic Health, where we challenge the business of healthcare and explore bold ideas that drive meaningful change. Hey everyone, welcome back. I am your host, Bradley Bostic of the Boombostic Health podcast. And today we have a very cool guest that she and I have been, through our busy schedules, trying to make this happen for months now. And I'm so happy to have you here with us, Melissa Butterworth, the CEO of Advanced Strategic Partners.
I'm so happy to be here. Hi, Brad. It's great to be here. Great to see you. And I'm so glad we could finally connect.
Absolutely. And where do we find you today?
I am in Miami, Florida on the beach. How about yourself?
Awesome. I am in Telluride. So this is a bit of a Boombostic Health in the wild, working from here, actually heading back to Chicago and Indianapolis here on Saturday. But I just have had a great time out here, have a lot of both business and a lot of fun enjoying the great outdoors. Well, welcome to the Boombostic Health community, and thanks for being here for episode 36. We have a lot to cover, so we'll dive right in. First of all, I'll just say Melissa is an incredibly accomplished individual who I love your story where none of us have a crystal ball. So you started as an executive more on the sales side, from what I recall, with some of the large lab companies, and then ultimately started seeing that, hey, there's opportunity to help advise these health systems on how to maximize the value of their labs. And you've grown this into a very successful enterprise, in addition to all the other things that you're doing as an entrepreneur and as a growing social media presence. Tell us a little bit about how you got into this and where you see things going for Advanced Strategic Partners at this point.
Sure, Bradley. Thank you so much for that nice introduction. So, I don't think any of us ever have a crystal ball or a straight line with our success, right? And I think just to appreciate a little bit of my success, I think it's important to understand a little bit more about my backstory. I did start in the diagnostic field about 28 years ago. Started with actually with a health system up in Jacksonville, Florida, that is now owned by Ascension Health. Helped them develop their outreach, and then eventually went to a company called Dynacare Laboratories. I was one of their executives and had a lot of stock in that company. We sold that company to LabCorp. I always said I would never work for one of the big labs, but never say never. Through that sale, I ended up an executive for LabCorp. And the irony was that in year 5 of being top executive of that company, I was actually fired. And that's one of the things that I usually don't share, but I think it's an important part of my backstory. And at the time, it was devastating, but it was really just kind of a setup for me to take a step back and reassess my life and look at where I wanted to be. And so at the age of 34, I started my own merger and acquisition firm. There was definitely a need in the market for a M&A firm, for really from the perspective of someone that really understood the industry, right? There were a lot of business bankers out there doing what we do, but there was not anybody out there that was familiar with the lab market from the inside. And so, our whole motto is that we are really, truly insiders on your side. I feel blessed. Now, fast forward, been in business for 19 years. We've done a little over now it's 2.4 billion. We just closed on 220. We didn't close, but we signed on $226 million worth of transactions in the last 2 weeks. I've got a phenomenal team. I have to give credit to my entire team. I've got Gary Huff, former CEO of LabCorp. I've got Rick Cooper, who you know very, very well. Rockstar, former chair of McDonald Hopkins. Of course, my partner, Dan Lucky. It's all about the team, right? And Brad, we've got the agreement and arrangement with your company, which has been a big part of why we've been able to be successful with large health systems. We just signed on one together, as you know, which we'll be able to talk more about once it's officially closed. But that was a $190+ million transaction. So I just feel blessed to be an entrepreneur, feel blessed to be in this space and to be able to work with great people like yourself.
Well, thank you. We appreciate the kind words as well about the good work of the team at HC1, where I serve as CEO and where we've partnered with ASP. And I think you're right that there's this great 1-2 punch there between the two companies. And just to unpack that a little bit before we zoom out to the broader macro world with labs and healthcare systems and where that's going in your view. But HC1 has developed this particular expertise in how to bring to life insights based on lab information, and also about how to truly understand the metrics and the value that exists within a lab enterprise. And in your business where you're working with health systems that may be evaluating how to best leverage their lab and considering the option of potentially divesting that enterprise or that component of their enterprise, it's a great marriage because we're able to plug in with our technology and expertise, bring to life those insights on what really is happening in the metrics. And because a lot of these health systems, they've got these lab enterprises and it's not truly set up as like a standalone type of a business area. And so it's tough to figure out what exactly the performance is. But then in addition to that, if you're going into considering some type of a transaction, it's great to be able to be in a position of strength. And so we like to help not only understand what the value has been that you've created, but also how much more value can we help you create, not only with respect to divesting, but also post if divestiture, where we can work together to optimize that asset. Because that's, obviously a big part of the value creation is what happens after a transaction occurs.
Yeah, 100%. And to add to what you were saying, Bradley, and for those viewers who are listening, one of the things that I have always, been a firm believer on is that in order to be successful, you really need to have a very specific niche, which is why we created Advanced Strategic Partners. Our team 100% focuses only on lab transactions. And when we made a shift 3 years ago to start focusing on health systems, and the reason that we partnered with your organization was because we really saw that there were so many health systems out there that did not have an understanding whether or not their lab outreach facilities were even profitable. And that's where your team comes in, which has just been such a great marriage, is that, your team has done a great job at being able to go in with the tools that you have and with the experts that you have and really helping both the hospital systems and our firm understand what it is that these health systems are actually holding. Is the outreach component really profitable? Is it not profitable? And then our firm takes it and does evaluation based on the numbers that we have been seeing in the street. So it really is a perfect marriage. And the fact that we've just accomplished our first deal together as a marriage is pretty unbelievable. And I think it's going to be probably the second largest deal in the U.S. when it comes to hospital transactions. So just super, super proud of our arrangement and our success together and of what we can help accomplish together.
Yeah, it's just as hard, if not harder, to play small as it is to play big. So I
Yeah.
like it. I like being up there at the bigger numbers with you. So let's zoom out a little bit and talk more about just the overall economic climate for healthcare and health systems. So there are a lot of headlines on this, but not many people are as close to it as you are, as somebody specializing in how to help these health systems that have a lab asset. What are the major forces you're seeing on the economics of these health systems and these headlines that relate to difficulty with making money, and what can they do in order to try to have a path with the lab in order to maybe help right the ship a bit financially?
Yeah, no, let's talk a little bit first about about the trends that we're seeing, and I can kind of drill it down from there. I mean, we are seeing more and more hospital systems looking to divest of their potential outreach. And, just to give you some statistics, over the last 3 years, there's typically about 24 to 30 transactions in our space. And historically, less than 10% were hospital transactions. Now that has risen to almost 30% of the transactions that we are seeing in the space are, in fact, hospital-based transactions. And why is that? It's not always what you would think. I mean, we're seeing when we're going into these hospital systems, that a lot of their outreach are actually very profitable because they've got profitable contracts with the major payers, right? With the Blue Crosses and the Cignas and the Aetnas. Hospital systems have that leverage. They've got very profitable contracts. And so their outreach, I mean, we've seen margins be anywhere from on the low end, 10, 12% profitability. And then recently we've seen them be all the way up to 48% profit margins. And so you wouldn't always expect to see that, especially in some of the health systems that are making the decision, even though they've got an asset that is 40 to 50% profit margin, they're still making the decision to sell that. And why is it? Why are we seeing that? I think the number one thing that we're hearing is that They're getting a lot of pressure financially as a hospital system as a whole. What we're seeing is that over 50% of the hospitals out there are operating at a loss right now. And so just because the laboratory is operating very profitably does not necessarily mean the hospital system as a whole is operating profitably. So these executives are having to make that tough decision about offloading an asset that may in fact be profitable just so that they can either pay off existing debt that they have and or put that money towards their core competencies. And so they're really kind of struggling with that across the board. And I think that is why we are seeing a lot more interest in having an understanding of what it is that they're holding on to when it comes to laboratory.
Right. So it's expensive to run a hospital. It's expensive to care for patients. The payer landscape's changing. We're seeing a lot of pressure on the insurance companies as well. The latest for the public companies, the latest numbers came out, and there's a lot of difficulty right now financially. And so you have this sort of diamond in the rough that is inside the health system that hasn't been appreciated fully. That's generating a nice bottom line that can be a monetizable asset. Now, you mentioned the payer dynamic where because you're a health system and you have this lab, you're able to bill at a rate that has better margins than if you're an independent, say, commercial lab. And this is just my not being as expert on this as you. So when you sell, if you decide to sell your outreach lab, when that transaction happens, are you generally tend to retain those existing insurance contracts, or do those get changed over for the new owner?
So in majority of cases, I would say at least in 98% of all of the transactions that we have seen in the market, that we have been involved in, that we've seen other bankers be involved in, the majority of them are done as asset transactions where their hospital systems are essentially selling a book of business. So they are not selling those contracts. So when an acquirer purchases that book of business, there is something that's known as a compressed value. So for example, let's just say that you are CEO of ABC hospital system and you are, given a report saying that you're generating over 100 million in your outreach. Well, that 100 million in your outreach is not necessarily going to be worth 100 million in the hands of a LabCorp or a Quest or a Sonic. And that is why you really need an experienced group like ours at Advanced Strategic Partners and like yours, quite frankly, with HC1, because those experienced folks that are working day in and day out in different hospital systems and doing transactions like this are going to be able to tell that hospital system, what does that compressed value look like? If that lab that was doing 100 million is sold to a Quest, what's it really going to look like under their contracts? It might be worth 70 million in their hands. It might be worth 60 million in their hands. Never seen it go north. I've never seen it go from it being worth 100 million in the hospital's hands to being 200 million in a competitor's hands, because the reality of it is that just does not happen. It's typically a compressed value. And does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think it's good for folks to understand that that's part of the nuance in the way that these transactions are structured, is understanding not only what your performance is today, but what that'll look like in the hands of an acquirer if it turns out that it makes the most sense to divest the lab asset, and that there's some science behind that.
Correct.
It's not just a guess. So where are things going with ASP? Kind of big picture. I mean, it seems like the momentum just keeps building. Well, you say you're 19 years in to doing this. Is that right?
Yeah, 19 years in, and every deal I keep saying this is going to be the last deal, and it becomes a big joke because I just keep having more and more fun. Love it. I've published 2 books now. We just came out with our second book called The End Game for Hospital Systems and Divestitures of Lab Assets Within Hospital Systems. I've got the original End Game book, which is more for lab owners. I built an incredible team, like I mentioned, with Rick and with Gary, and we've really pivoted over the last 2 years. And our focus now is on very large health system transactions, as well as very large pathology transactions. We still work from time to time with larger clinical molecular laboratories, but we've really kind of pivoted where the market's going, and we're seeing a lot of activity in the pathology side of the market and a ton of activity in the hospital side of the market. So we tend to go where the market goes. And so we see a lot more very large transactions, which we plan to be announcing in the next couple of months as we work through the cycle with a lot of these deals. And we would like to work more and more with your organization and continue doing what we've just successfully accomplished together, where, you all help our organization with going in and understanding with your ability to do the information piece and, gathering of the data piece. And then also, as you mentioned earlier, these hospital systems that do make the decision to sell, they're going to need your expertise on the back end to help with that transition. And so I just see our marriage being a great long-term marriage. And of course, we've had a number of people approach us over the years that have tried to purchase our organization, but I don't see any of that happening anytime in the future. I love what I'm doing, and it just, we're gonna keep moving forward.
Well, you're a fantastic entrepreneurial success story, and also someone who is playing a key role to keep the overall healthcare system moving in a positive direction. Because candidly, if you have an asset that is better off in the hands of another organization, being able to facilitate that in an efficient way, it's just part of a healthy economic model. And I'll just, for a moment, share that I think the value of laboratory medicine will continue to dramatically increase because of the advent of AI, because of the kinds of technologies that can be used now to define exactly what all of these lab signals mean. And that connects even more into not just 70% of all diagnostic decisions are based on lab values, but actually every single healthcare decision is informed by the majority of that information is lab. If you think about just your health journey, the lab continues to tell a story every step of the way. So there's this, yes, labs can generate a very healthy bottom line today in the customary delivery of care. When we start moving into more of the accountable care, value-based care world, I think lab becomes even more integral to that.
Yeah.
And then I think ultimately it's also a matter of connecting the entire value chain of healthcare from the more proactive primary care, preventative world, even functional world, all the way through to if you have some type of a rare disease, how do we more efficiently close those gaps in care by connecting into the right kinds of advanced pharmaceutical opportunities. And none of that is possible without lab information. So I think what you're doing is incredibly important today. I think it's going to become even more important. And the final point I'll make on that is health systems and labs as standalone entities are not best equipped to maximize the value of the insights that exist inside their data.
Yeah.
It's what you said earlier about being very specialized makes a big difference. There's a reason that Google was so fantastically successful at search. And it wasn't because they were trying to do 50 different things when they got started. It was, this thing is a search box that allows you to ask anything or put in some words and get results. I think as it relates to what we're doing at HC1, where it's all about every single day, this talented team identifying ways to apply these advanced technologies to generate insights and doing that across tens of billions of lab values, you're just in a different sort of level of the stratosphere to bring that value. So I think this combination of what ASP does to help really identify those opportunities to potentially divest a lab, coupled with what HC1 can do to unearth this significant amount of additional value, I think sets everybody up for success. The health system, whoever the acquirer is, ASP, HC1, and we're just going to continue to build these insights over time. And I think what we're going to start finding is we can be predictive in a way that is truly revolutionary. And I'll give you one example of something we've already created, a model that is actually able to predict based on routine lab values who has the highest likelihood of developing cognitive decline years in advance. So imagine if you could manage cognitive decline as a chronic condition and never have people get Alzheimer's. Like, those are the kinds of things that this combination of lab insight and pharma can unlock. And I think positioning these assets to be in a situation where those kinds of value equations can start being unlocked, it's that next big leap beyond just the immediate step of whether or not you should divest your lab. So I think if you fast forward 10 years and we're still doing this, we're actually in a place where we look back and say, man, can you believe how far we've come? And I think it just keeps accelerating, especially with the advent of AI. So incredibly fun and interesting conversation. Melissa, keep doing the great work you're doing at ASP, and thanks so much for the partnership that we have between our between HC1 and ASP.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful, and love seeing everything that you all are doing as well. And let's just keep rocking and rolling forward together.
Sounds perfect. All right, everyone. Well, thanks again for being here to learn more about what's happening with lab transactions and how health systems are positioning for the future with considering divesting their lab assets. Melissa's the best at that, and really great to learn from her. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week for our next episode of Boombostic Health. Have a Boombostic day. Take care.